The following program may contain mature subject matter and sexuality. Viewer discretion is advised.
All right, is everybody ready? Okay, Nicole's going to come in about 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay.
Nicole Gorham knew she had to be tough when she joined the Ottawa Police Service.
You don't want to seem weak, and you don't want to seem... I was told when I got hired by my coach officer, as a female, you're going to have to work at least twice as hard as any male to even be considered an equal. And even then, you'll never be equal.
Her first major test came 3 years later when she raced to the scene of a triple murder.
Son ended up killing his dad, his mom, and his sister. Guy ended up sitting in blood-soaked clothes for the remainder of the day. And to me, like that, I will never forget that. That's a smell that stays with me. But as a female, especially being in a horrific scene, you just had to, straighten your shoulders and go on.
Later, Nicole found her true calling off the road when she became one of the faces of community policing.
Don't think it's a good idea to be swinging off the bridge. You don't know, the integrity of the ropes or anything else. You don't know what lays beneath the surface of the water.
With each TV appearance or selfie with future recruits, she boosted her social media presence.
I had a very high-profile Twitter account as a police officer that I had to go off because I was being attacked.
But when the trolls started to mock her on Twitter, she realized the attacks weren't just from the outside. They were coming from inside the force, from anonymous officers. Soon, this sexist slur started making the rounds over email. They called you the C word in that meme.
The C word, absolutely. They said it's like death by 1,000 C words. It's internal. I thought, oh my goodness, these are my peers, my colleagues. Who thinks that about me and why? You lost all credibility. I mean, it was humiliating. It's such a derogatory term. It's not used very often and for good reason, right? And I thought, if that's what they think, they're laughing at me behind the scenes because it had circulated.
As the harassment escalated, Nicole didn't feel she could turn to her supervisors for help.
So the sergeant was sitting at the table and he started doing a briefing. And unfortunately, there was a female police officer with another service that had taken her life. He looked up, he put the paper down, and he said, and that's why we don't hire women. With a stern face. It's completely unacceptable and completely disrespectful.
Now in the shadow of the station she once worked, she's planting instead of policing. After 18 years on the force, Nicole is on long-term leave, diagnosed with PTSD.
I worked as a dispatcher for 14 years. In the course of a day, half on 911, half on dispatch.
This dispatcher is now retired and speaking out for the first time about what it was like to be a woman in the Ottawa Police Service.
I heard two voices at the entrance, and one of them fell to his knees with the hands looking up as if a thank you, and they looked at me and they said, "Finally, fresh meat." And that was my very first introduction to officers at the Ottawa Police.
We're calling her Carol, not her real name, to protect her identity. For years, she tried to rise above the sexist comments and innuendos. Then she was invited to what she thought was an office ski weekend.
These are people that I consider my friends, as well as my supervisors. What could go wrong? Honestly, we're there to ski.
Instead, only 2 members of her unit showed up. Asleep in her bedroom, she had an unwelcome visitor.
All I could see was the black shadow of a person, a fairly big person. And as he came closer to me, and he didn't have a stitch of clothing on, he grabbed my wrist and forced me to stroke him. And I tried to pull back from his grip, but he wouldn't let me. I was saying, "What are you doing?" I said, "You're my boss."
Carol kept the trauma bottled up for half her career. Then just before she retired, the dam broke.
I came forward to members of the executive some of the highest levels. And I told them what I had experienced. And before I could actually get into details of the event, I was stopped and told that they didn't want to become a witness.
She didn't proceed with charges, but by the time Carol left the force in 2017, she was addicted to painkillers and struggling to recover. Meanwhile, her attacker retired too and found a second career as an international policing consultant. Sometimes when Anne is alone in her car, she imagines she's still on patrol, doing the job she loved.
It was like winning the lottery. It was a dream come true. I remember saying I would do this job for free.
When this police officer was hired in 2010, she knew she was walking into a male-dominant culture, but didn't expect it to be so toxic.
They discuss female officers' breasts. They rank women. They all have what I've heard is called a short list of the top 5 women that they would sleep with. And like one colleague said to me, "You make everyone's short list," as if it was something I should be proud and feel comfortable with.
Anne's initiation into that sexist culture began in her rookie year after a birthday celebration for a colleague. When she couldn't find her designated driver, she reluctantly accepted a ride home from a fellow police officer.
The highway's to the right. We come to a T intersection. The highway's to the right, and this officer turns to the left. And I knew in that moment something was wrong. And I said, where are we going? And he said, just a quick stop at my house. I want to show you what you can afford on a first-class constable salary. So we get to his house, and he makes a drink and gives me a tour. So the tour ends in his bedroom, and I'm very uncomfortable, and I started to cry. And I demanded that he drive me home, and he said that he was too drunk to drive at this point. So then I started to cry even more. He took my pants off, and I said, "Why are you doing this if I'm not participating?" And he said, "Shh, just do it for you." And then the next thing I remember, he sexually assaulted me, but he raped me at this point.
She blocked the assault from her memory, but stifling it made the PTSD worse. So 7 years later, she reported the sexual assault, filed a human rights complaint, and named her attacker.
I think your first fear as a woman is people aren't going to believe me. But the reality is, they believe you, they don't care.
Right now, a growing list of Ottawa police officers are being investigated for violence or misconduct involving women. Constable Kevin Benloss charged with discreditable conduct for the alleged rape of a female officer. Constable Jesse Hewitt, 9 counts of misconduct for taking videos of vulnerable women. Constable Carl Keenan, already convicted of assault after knocking a woman unconscious, he's accused of sexually harassing rookie officers. Constable York Brisebois, accused of assault with a weapon and uttering threats. Staff Sergeant Will Hinterberger faces 21 charges, including sexual assault and forcible confinement. They're all suspended with pay and intend on fighting the allegations. Then there's Jennifer and Peter Vanderzander's story of romance and retribution that implicates the city's top cops.
I got into the service because I studied law and criminology in university and really enjoyed it.
I've been a police officer for more than 17 years now, since 2003. Wonderful career, it's my passion.
Jennifer and Peter met while working at the courthouse. She was a court liaison. He was responsible for security. Both single parents, they gravitated to each other, but their relationship was threatened by the arrival of Jennifer's new boss.
He told me that he wanted to date me. And I just thought it was so odd and unnecessary that he would say that. And I started talking about Peter. I started talking about Peter and our families and how, we were blending our families together, how, our kids get along so great. I clearly communicated to him that I wasn't interested in him that way. And it didn't stop. I was showing in my body language, I was showing in my words that I was not interested in him romantically.
Despite her signals, Jennifer says her boss kept asking her out. When he found out she was applying for a supervisor job, he implied he could help.
It also made me feel that, professionally, that I'm in a vulnerable position. He's relating advancing my career to dating him.
This is the man who wanted to date her. Superintendent Uday Jaswal, groomed to be the future chief. In this twisted triangle, Jaswal wasn't just Jennifer's boss, he was also her future husband's commanding officer.
I see him in the hallway. I say, Superintendent Jaswal, can I speak with you for a moment? He says, Peter, absolutely.
In the courthouse, Peter asked Jaswal politely to back off, but his concerns were shrugged off. So Peter confronted Jaswal again.
I walked a few feet down the hall, knocked on the door, and said, I'm sorry for interrupting. And then I turned directly to the superintendent in front of my boss, in front of my boss's boss, And I said, you know what, Superintendent, my wife has asked you to stop. I know I asked you to stop several minutes ago. You blew me off. I'm now telling you the sexual harassment of my wife needs to stop.
Nothing happened. Instead, Jaswal's star kept rising, and in the summer of 2016, he was recruited by Durham Regional Police to be their new deputy chief.
He's now has more power, more authority, but for my own benefit, I thought, well, at least he's gone.
But controversy dogged Jaswal in Durham. In his 2 years there, he and other top officials were embroiled in allegations of abuse of power. But there were no charges, so Ottawa hired him back.
I'm paralyzed because I cannot do anything. I'm powerless.
Coming up, there's a price to pay for taking on power.
Now he's the deputy chief. I knew the consequences would be substantial.
In the summer of 2018, Jennifer and Peter Vanderzander's relationship was picture perfect. The harassment in her past was far from her mind until she came face to face with Uday Jaswal at a staff luncheon. He was now deputy chief.
It was an overt touching of my midsection with like a lingering kind of like rubbing by me. It's incomprehensible. Like, it just does not make any sense. It's so brazen. It's so I don't know, like sense of entitlement to just do what he wants.
But soon Jaswal's past in Durham crashed into his present. In a preliminary report, Ontario's Civilian Police Commission found Jaswal acted in an intimidating, harassing, and tyrannical manner toward officers and civilian members. Ottawa's police board was stunned, but continued to support him.
The nature of those allegations has already been reported, and they are serious. That said, these are unproven allegations.
Jaswal voluntarily pulled back from some responsibilities, but didn't face any other consequences. That pushed Jennifer to file her human rights complaint.
I have nothing to hide, and I'm welcoming a full and fair investigation into those allegations.
Jaswal declined our request for an interview. In his statement of defense, he characterized his interactions with Jennifer as misunderstandings and apologized for awkwardly touching her. He said the incident was clumsy and unfortunate, but it was not intentional. Then, spurred by Jennifer's actions, 2 female officers also filed complaints, alleging Jaswal harassed them too.
I think this is a Me Too moment for the Ottawa Police. The fact that someone can rise to that level in the Ottawa Police Service and would still feel that they could engage in that kind of behavior still feel it's safe or it's acceptable for them to engage in that kind of behavior gives you a sense of how deeply rooted those kinds of norms are in the organization.
In just the last 3 years, 14 women who work here have come forward to allege sexual harassment and abuse by their colleagues, by Ottawa police officers. But there are other victims outside the force within the larger community. And in these cases, the badge may not be protecting the women, but shielding the predators.
I would say like a lot of women my age, I went online and I was using Bumble and I matched with him.
We are calling this woman Jane. In 2018, she met an Ottawa police officer online. She thought he would be a safe date.
I saw his profile. I remember seeing photos and he looked very kind and like approachable and had similar interests.
But soon, alarm bells started ringing.
He came to pick me up from work, and as we were passing the bridge that's like right on Sussex and Stanley, he had just pointed to the bridge and said that if I were to ever to cheat on him, that he was going to throw my body in the river and that no one was going to find me because he's a police officer.
When the threats escalated, Jane reported the officer, only to have her complaint dismissed by an inspector a few weeks later.
I just felt like the wind was taken out of me because I thought, what is the point of me risking my life and coming forward and telling them about this?
But she refused to let it go. Afraid for her life, Jane wrote a letter to the police chief demanding he reopen the investigation. 5 months later, the officer was arrested. That's when Jane found out there were 6 other victims.
I think he's a monster. I think what he did was very calculated and he knew what he was doing, especially working as a police officer.
Constable Eric Post was charged with 32 criminal offenses, the most of any Ottawa police officer in history. Among them, sexual assault, harassment, and pointing his gun at a victim. But in a deal with the Crown, he pleaded guilty to 5 charges: assault and uttering threats. The others were dropped. Meanwhile, the investigation into Jaswal resulted in 6 charges of misconduct under the Police Services Act. This time, the board suspended him. Jaswal is now the 7th and highest-ranking Ottawa police officer facing allegations of violence or misconduct involving women. Through it all, Peter stood by his wife. Then came the repercussions. My
career goes from an aspiring sergeant, one of the youngest sergeants in OPS history, promoted to sergeant, up and comer. My career goes from that into free fall. It goes into a complete tailspin.
His work performance was suddenly put under a microscope, and he was hit with 4 complaints in one day, all authorized by Ottawa's Chief of Police, Peter Slowly.
What was the message?
If you come forward with sexual harassment allegations against senior members of the Ottawa Police, against the Deputy Chief, Chief Peter Slowly, or anyone in a higher up, there are going to be consequences. Guard yourself accordingly.
The Civilian Police Commission is reviewing what it calls Chief Slowly's deeply disturbing actions against Peter. The chief declined our request for an interview, citing ongoing legal action. But in its statement, he called sexual violence deeply rooted, a problem that has plagued policing for too long.
I have vowed to put an end to systemic sexual violence and all forms of harassment.
As internal complaints mounted, the force hired a Toronto law firm to investigate.
We're creating a new opportunity to help our members, to help our women, to feel more comfortable, more valued, more protected, more safe.
But the law firm can't compel officers to testify, and it can't lay charges.
Now, there is no substantive change here. There is an advantage that the members can go directly to this organization. However, this organization has also no authorities to investigate Police Services Act matters. They have no authorities to investigate any criminal matters.
Kelley Donovan is a former Waterloo constable who researches police culture. She says hiring an outside law firm won't increase accountability because the firm is still paid and directed by Ottawa Police.
So whether an allegation is made through the internal channels as a harassment complaint, or whether it's a criminal allegation of a sexual assault, it has to be managed by a body that has no ties to the police service whatsoever. Because as long as you leave it internal, you always run a risk that there could be implicit conflicts of interest.
Across Canada, police women are finally joining forces, speaking out, even taking their message to the skies. They won't settle for anything less.
I want to shine a light on the fact that no woman needs to tolerate it.
It took me a long time to realize that the only way to protect yourself is to fight back and to stand up for yourself and to not buy into the fear.
These officers have put their badges on the line. Now they need backup.